So much fun when I get to do new things. Okay, so I'd like to welcome our guest speaker, Mary Hoffman. She's an excellent presenter, and she's going to share a wealth of information with all of us. I know many of you are very excited for this presentation. You guys have been wanting this since week one. So, Mary, can you share your screen?
Yeah, let's see. Can you see that?
Yes, I can. Okay, then you're good to go.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Mary Hoffman, and I was asked to speak at this. I've spoken before at these groups, and I just love them. But just a quick rundown history about me. I've worked in the family law field since 2008, so almost 14 years. I don't do math. I'm a social worker, not an accountant. But I've been in the business for a long time, and I've worked for family court services prior to this. Now I branched off and we started our own partnership, my partner and I. And then also I am now executive director for an agency called Kids Services, which does supervised visitations. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Let's see. So just to get started, I kind of want to lay the foundation. So when we think about co-parenting, we're talking about cases where there's been a divorce and there's children, or where it's a custody case for never married parents. And we want, at the most basic level, effective co-parenting is you have to remain in regular and frequent communication. You're both supporting your children's development as they get older, strong family relationships. Family is amazing, and it's kind of that community and tribe thing. And then decisions made together between you and your co-parent. This is lovely and ideal, but this tends to be for lower conflict cases. I say cases, I'll go back and forth between cases and parties, but this is where there's really low conflict, and I will talk about what co-parent conflict looks like as we go along. So the first part of the presentation is about child development, and I'm not going to go too into that because I believe that you guys get some of that already. But what I do want to talk about is the importance of each developmental stage as we go along, and what kind of some red flags might be if your child is not coping well with the change. So of course, infants, infant to 12 months, some tips are just keep your routines consistent. So consistent bedtime, feeding time, and all that, again, can be challenging if you're parenting from two homes, but ideally that would be the best environment, and try to have the same environment. So if you can use similar types of diapers, types of food, feeding schedules, that consistency is really what kiddos need to help feel safe in their environment. And keep each other informed of what's going on. There are a number of co-parenting apps out there. One of them is called Our Family Wizard, and that's like a central location where you guys both have access to that. You can put, schedules, games, holidays, medical records. You can house all of that in one app, and that makes it kind of a nice place that you both have access to. Communication is important. You should, when you do a transition from one home to another, you really do want to be communicating with your co-parent. When did the baby last eat? When was their last nap? So that it keeps that transition between homes a lot smoother. Keep routines consistent, and that's going to be something you'll hear consistently throughout my presentation is the importance of consistency between the parties and for their kids. Frequent contact, and actually this is a duplicate slide, maybe. Actually, it's still, we're in the 1 to 3 year old, so a lot of kiddos might still be in diapers and type of food, and really they're not able to express verbally what they might need between the homes, because they're just learning that part. This is the stage though where you might start see some separation anxiety. And I have a lot of co-parents say, well, she just screams when she goes with dad, and it just, she screams and she doesn't like it, she's uncomfortable, she's scared at my co-parents home. And so then it's like, okay, is she, or is it maybe some natural separation anxiety? Because if you think about like dropping off a kiddo this age at like childcare or daycare, there a lot of times can be that screaming and crying and yelling, and it's just because of separation anxiety. If you call that childcare provider back 15 minutes later, the child's probably off in the corner having fun. So this can look normal in this age, and does not necessarily mean that something is happening that's bad in the other home. Some co-parenting tips, again, communication. You want to have limits and start to enforce limits and boundaries. This age, it's never too young to remind your kiddos that you love them and that you'll both be there for them. And then share information with the co-parent. So an FYI, children may act out or express anger with the parent that they feel most comfortable with. So if you in this age range have a kiddo where maybe they're really, really acting out in your home, it might not necessarily be because there's something going bad in the other home. It could just be that they feel the most secure with you, and they feel that they can express themselves without any fears, and that there won't be any, retaliation is kind of a big word or strong word for that. But, this is normal adjustment. 6 to 8 year olds, talk with your child about fears and feelings and share them with your co-parent. You still want that predictability and that consistency, but at 6 to 8, we're starting to see a little bit more independence come out. So you want to be flexible with one another. Maybe something came up and your kiddo really wants to go when it's on your time, like let's say maybe a birthday party or something along those lines. Having that flexibility for kids this age really is going to help just their growth and their development. It's okay to encourage your children to spend time with your co-parent, and it's ideal. That's the other thing too, as I talk about this, again, I am talking about generalities, and I'm talking about, here's some tips to help keep that conflict between you and your co-parent low, because we know that conflict between co-parents really can have a negative impact on the development of your child. So when it's safe, encourage them to spend time with your co-parent. Encourage them to take, if they have complaints about, mom does this, mom does that, rather than dad going and talking, to mom, maybe encourage them to go talk to mom first before you get involved. And then allow different interests to go across ages, genders, that type of thing. 9 to 11, be aware of your kiddo's mood and activity level. This is where younger than this, but you're going to start to get into like extracurricular activities. And it is so important that if you guys go to, let's just say it's a basketball game. If you have to sit on opposite sides of the bleachers, so there is no, conflict in front of the child, that is what you need to do. And if you can't do that, then you should just say, mom goes to this game, dad goes to this game. Because I do a lot of child interviews, and the conflict between their parents at their extracurricular activities is really, really embarrassing to them, for one. But for two, they're not going to be concentrating on the game. Not that they have to, win, 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 but they're not going to be concentrating on the game. They're going to be concentrating on, oh my gosh, is my mom and dad, getting in an argument right now in front of everyone. So just be mindful of that. Keep your kiddo out of the conflict. And I'm going to give you some tips on how to do that as we go along as well. Encourage that same communication complaints directly with their parent. And really, if you can, be consistent between co-parenting when it comes to what rules are and what rule breaking looks like. And if you can make that cohesive between the two homes. So if kiddo is grounded at dad's home, and grounded means that the child doesn't get their tablet, for example. When they go over to mom's home, or the opposite parent's home, I should say, it's really important to say, no, you know what, this is something that you did. This is the consequence. And guess what? You're grounded here too, buddy. If you could do that, that's ideal. Let's see. Again, rules consistent, schedules consistent, but we are starting to build in a little bit more flexibility on this. Be positive role models. Your kids are watching and they're learning, and the fight at the basketball game, that's teaching them also how to cope with stress and conflict. In this kind of preteen age, it is also important to have firm and fair guidelines. Kiddos this age will, well, all ages, they thrive in structure. But even as they get older, it seems counterintuitive, but in their teen years, they do love structure. And so again, if that can be across the board between two houses, that is definitely ideal. Then we have the 15 to 18-year-old teens, and they're kind of a whole other population in themselves, but they're starting to really learn their independence. They're starting to define who they are, and they are very, like, their primary focus over anything is their peers, their friends, and what their friends are doing. And it's okay to have, it's okay for your teenager to want to go to their friend's house to stay the night rather than go watch a movie with, dad and dad's girlfriend. It's not personal. It's not that the child doesn't want to spend time with that parent, but the child wants to spend time with their friends. And so that is definitely important. Same with be careful to not allow cracks in the discipline between you and your co-parent, because this age, and it can happen younger, but they can do what's called triangulating. And I'm not sure if y'all know what that is, but they go to dad and say one thing, then they go to mom and say another thing. And so it just kind of creates this three-way of lack of communication, accusations, all of that. They're not necessarily doing it to be bad, or that doesn't mean they're a bad kid, but they're exploring and they are testing boundaries. And, testing boundaries is vital to development and to how the child is what they're going to be like as an adult in society. Shield your teens from conflict. That goes across all ages. Again, that conflict is what really can impact this development. Avoid being your teenager's best friend. A lot of parents, this one's hard because they love their kids and they love hanging out with their kid, and it can be hard, but really going back to that, teens especially thrive in structure. They need a role model, not a best friend. So if you can really avoid doing that, we will see some teens this in some children in this age become what's called parentified. And that is where they're actually taking care of one of the parents. And so we see that in the higher conflict cases, or cases where there's domestic violence or even maybe some mental health challenges. And a few things about teenagers that is important to know, because it could be completely normal, is these pieces here, while they're normal, they can be super annoying to adults. So forgetfulness, complaining, lack of enthusiasm, pessimistic, all of the sarcastic. We love a good sarcastic teen, but that doesn't mean that they're doing bad or that they're being bad. I mean, it could. I'm not saying it doesn't. It could. Maybe they do need some help. Maybe they do need to have a counselor or someone to talk about where they feel safe. But absent, without any conflict, and for all intents and purposes, if their development and their environment is quote unquote normal, these behaviors are, again, they're testing boundaries as well. So it's frustrating for sure, but it's not necessarily that they're bad kids. So grieving the loss of the relationship, this is going to go back to the relationship that you had with your co-parent. And there's tons of grief models out there. I picked a few that are kind of the most common, but this can be anywhere from being divorced and losing your partner that way, or maybe you didn't really have much of a relationship with them, and maybe grieving is not going to be part of your case or your factors in your case. One of the more common grief models is the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, and that starts with denial. So let's say if it's a divorce or a separation and you did have a significant relationship with that person, typically one parent will have been thinking about divorce for a year before they actually tell the other party. And that means they've already gone through denial. I don't want to separate, we can do this, to anger and being angry at their partner, bargaining, well, maybe if I do this, he'll do that. And then some depression, and then finally acceptance that this is where I'm at. We can't be together any longer. And when that parent tells the other parent that news that, hey, I want a divorce or I want a separation, the other parent is going to be in the denial phase. So they're starting from the very beginning when the other parent has processed it for about a year. So that's something to keep in mind. There's one called The Lever in the Left. There's some resources down at the bottom that you can look at. But really, it's also doesn't go like I'm trying to think of the word. It doesn't go from A to B. So you might have denial and anger, and then maybe some depression, and you could possibly go back to some anger. It's not all in a line that, goes from A to Z. So I've said it a couple of times, separation of parents can be stressful. What is the biggest difference between those children who bounce back and those who do not? Does anyone know? I'll give the answer. It's conflict. So if you think about it, let's say the parents are still married, and there's not a divorce isn't even in the picture, but they constantly fight. That conflict there can be damaging to the child, and can even be more damaging than the divorce itself. So conflict, whether within the marriage or the co-parent conflict after the marriage or relationship, that really can be key on how children thrive and survive. There's the answer, even if the parents are still together. So I said we talk about what is co-parent conflict. So conflict, for one, doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. I mean, when you go home and you say, I want Chinese for dinner, and your spouse says, well, I want pizza, that's a conflict, right? But that doesn't mean it has to be bad. So it's how you and your partner work together or don't, that kind of determines that level of conflict. Um, but not being able to agree on your children's schedules or the routines. So I talked a ton about, consistency and having routines and structure. But let's say you just don't agree in between the two different homes. That can be kind of scary for a child and can be damaging to their development and growth. New significant others. So I have a lot of parents say, oh, we're fine. We get along just fine. We're doing this together. We're doing our paperwork. We're going to co-parent great. And at the time, they do co-parent great and they do get along great until one of them meets someone new. And that's usually when co-parenting relationships start to fall apart. Another comment on new significant others really is also family and friends. So family and friends and new significant others can really be ripe for conflict because, mom's family is over here, dad's family is over here, and they're each experiencing them based on what that parent is saying. And of course they want to protect, I want to protect my daughter from, want to protect my granddaughter from the conflict in my son's house. And so you got to watch for that. It's lovely to have support in your process or in your journey, but just be mindful that their best interests might not come to fruition. Money and finances is always an issue, specifically regarding child support. And who's going to pay for the dentist and who's going to pay for this. And granted, if you go through the court system, you should outline all of that so that you know who is going to be making decisions regarding the dentist or the doctor, who's not. Most of the time in Idaho, it's joint. That you have to be able to show that there's a significant reason on why you should not have joint custody. And it's on a sidebar, there's joint legal custody and there's joint physical custody. There's sole legal and there's sole physical. By legal custody, I mean decision making. So who is going to decide the doctor, dentist, all of that stuff? Is it going to be joint or is it going to be sole, where maybe only one parent is, due to a variety of different reasons? Physical custody is where the kiddo is going to lay their head at night. So who has physical custody and has the child in their care? Is it joint? Maybe you have every other week or even every other weekend. That still can be joint. If it's sole custody, that typically means no visitation at all. Parenting styles, I talked a little bit about, but keeping that consistent between the two homes. But even like you can't agree on parenting styles, like let's say spanking, for example. One parent is in favor, the other parent is not. How do you resolve that conflict? Because it's a conflict. Another one is withholding visitation. So that one can be big and can be tricky. And I don't advise that anyone withhold visitations. If you have a court order that says the child is supposed to go to your co-parent's home, you could get in a lot of trouble if you don't follow that. Now, let's say maybe you've got safety concerns. Well, then that's maybe something a little bit different. And there are a number of ways that you can handle the safety concerns anywhere. I'm not promoting to call child protection, but anywhere from child protection to even maybe having law enforcement do a welfare check. I will say, once you involve the law enforcement in your co-parenting relationship, it's really hard to unring that bell. And that will drive up that conflict. The use of the court system to settle minor disagreements is a huge one. We see a lot of people modify, and they continually modify their case over something that was really more of just a disagreement between the two parents. It doesn't mean that the court necessarily needs to be involved, but we see parents utilize the court system in that way. Of course, undermining your co-parent, again, dad says, I have to do this. And you say, well, don't worry about that. You're here now, so you don't have to do that. That's co-parent conflict. Of course, any sort of arguing, name calling, that's obvious conflict. Blaming your co-parent or other people is co-parent conflict. So on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being low conflict and 10 being high conflict, I would be curious where you all rate the level of conflict between you and your co-parent. And I'm not going to ask you to talk about that, but it's something to think about. Where do I rank myself or rank us as conflict, the level of for our co-parent or with our co-parent. Then the other kind of exercise is, where would your children rate the level of conflict between you and your co-parent? Because and kind of asking yourself those questions can hopefully give you a little bit of insight and really just recognize, like, okay, this is where I'm at. We have pretty high level of conflict. What can we do? As I'm drinking my energy drink here. So when children are caught in the middle of conflict, there are some key things that you don't want to do. We talked about what is co-parent conflict, but how do we involve our children in our conflict? And one of them is when you ask them who they want to live with. In Idaho, the age that a child can say or determine who they want to live with is 18. And the reason it's 18 is because this is an adult decision. We should really not be putting children in, do you want to live with your mom? Do you want to live with me? Now, granted, as kids get older, especially in their teens, they're going to want to say in the parenting plan, and that's okay. But just as long as you're mindful about not actually involving them, it's like with your teen, okay, yes, that's fine. You want this, but just so you know, that might not be the outcome. For one, the judge could completely order something different. When you use them as messengers, kids are not very good messengers. They have limited memories still. And I don't know if y'all remember the game where you'd sit in the circle and you do that secret game, and it goes, all the way around to the next person that's next to you. And what was the original message and what was the end message? And pretty much 9 times out of 10, it's not the same. So children aren't good as messengers. And an example too I can give you is that, let's say, okay, mom says to Johnny, tell your dad next week that soccer practice is canceled. Well, 4 or 5 days later, when the child is with dad and the child has forgotten to tell dad that it's canceled, and now they're sitting at soccer practice wondering what's going on. So it's not that, I don't necessarily think that a lot of people intentionally or purposefully use their children as messengers, but it's just good to be mindful of not doing that, because they're just not very good at relaying messages. When you ask them to spy for you, so it's one thing to say, hey, how was your week with your dad? Or, hey, you went to Thanksgiving with your mom, who all was there? That's one thing. This is more, asking them to, hey, go through your mom's phone, go through her phone, who's her boyfriend? Who is that guy? And it really just puts them right in the middle I mean, it just by nature of when you're asking, if you ask a kid to cry, we'll say for you. Exchanges are definitely one of the areas for ripe conflict. And the reason is that a lot of times that's when the parents see one another. So they use the time during an exchange to say, oh, by the way, soccer practice is canceled next week. Well, then, then that could provoke an argument or a disagreement, and the kids are sitting right there. So it's best to wait for another time. Give your co-parent a call. Get on the co-parenting app. There are a number of different ways that you can keep them out of the middle and keep exchanges civil. Even if you have to each stay in your vehicle, obviously with a super young child, you can't do that. But just if you can keep them out of it, it's just a benefit to them overall. When they hear you speaking badly about your co-parent is huge. So one thing that I like to talk about, so if you think about it, what do we do when someone has a baby, or you haven't seen someone's kiddo for a long time, and people even in the grocery store, oh my goodness, he looks just like you, oh my goodness, she has your laugh, those types of things. But then you turn around and you say, your mom is such a jerk and your dad is this. They actually internalize that, and they say in their little minds, they say, well, I'm half dad and I'm half mom. Mom doesn't like dad, so she must not like all of me. And that's how children process and internalize that particular component. So time-wise, okay, so some tips for reducing conflict with your co-parent. So first of all, separate homes are separate homes. So even if it's, let's say, mom keeps the family home and dad's the one that moves out, there really should be no unannounced visits, because what does that do? That is not consistent. That creates chaos in the children's mind. And it also is very confusing to them because, they went through this whole thing of, well, mom and dad are splitting up, but now dad's coming back and he's in the kitchen getting food, and he's, took a nap on the couch. And that can be very confusing for a child. Establish a separate time without the other parent. So we see a lot of, especially young parents and young kiddos, we see one parent saying, okay, you can have time with little Johnny, but I'm going to be there to supervise, because maybe you've got some safety concerns and you want to be there to supervise. Again, that's confusing for a child, but not to mention, it is very ripe for conflict. So when we talk about supervising visitations, there are a number of ways that you can do that where you're not necessarily involving yourself as the supervisor or your co-parent as your supervisor. We talked already about picking up children and exchanges. We see a lot of cases where the police station is where the children are exchanged. And there's a couple of concerns about that. And so for one, I don't know if any of y'all have been just in the general police stations. There's usually not a lot of police officers around. They're out driving around and patrolling. And so you might run into an empty lobby and there's not necessarily police presence there. It might take them just as long to respond as it would if you did it at Jackson's down the street. The other part too is the older that kids get, again, in doing child interviews, I've talked with kids that have had this, where parents exchanged at police stations. And, for one, they're like, how bad is this that my parents have to do this at a police station. Like it's not good for them. They internalize it. They also, then again, kind of can be that sense of embarrassment once they realize, holy cow, we're doing this at a police station. Family and friends is kind of the same with exchanges and also supervising. It's not necessarily recommended because again, it's ripe for conflict. Reducing, so planned how to handle contact with your co-parent during your time. So if the two of you can work together to say, hey, okay, let's do a phone call every night around 7 to say goodnight. And I say around 7 because the second that it's 7:05, a lot of times one of the parents is, they're late, they're not, this isn't important to them, they don't care, when really maybe the child just got sick or, something happened. So it's, on one hand, it makes sense to have like that co-parenting contact. It definitely is important, but don't try to assign a time to it. And also be mindful of the younger the child you have, to try to have them do a 30-minute, good night. For those of you that have had those younger kids, that's just not going to happen. So plan ahead for events and holidays. So with as much advance notice as possible, don't wait for Wednesday to come around to talk to your co-parent about Thanksgiving that's on Thursday. So try to be mindful of planning ahead, because this is then going to reduce the stress at the time that you talk to your co-parent about what you want to do. Use proposals rather than arguments. So we say make a proposal. So let's say you call mom and you say, hi, I want to talk about Johnny's soccer practice. If now is not a good time, then when? And that opens it up to say, okay, it gives the other parent time to kind of think about, okay, so that's not that immediate stress of, oh my gosh, we have to talk about it right now. But it also allows communication that is respectful, and they're more than likely going to receive the message in a different way if you approach it that way, rather than saying, you always do this, blah, blah, blah. And then on the other hand, if you are that parent that is, the receiving parent, rather than ignoring your co-parent, even if you have to just put, I'll think about it, or, I'm busy, I will call you tomorrow, or something like that, just respond. Just even say yes, no, or I'll think about it. No response. Again, that's where you're going to start to see some of that arguing and that conflict between parents. I don't know. So the BIF approach on communicating is an excellent way to communicate. And it's by a book or a gentleman, Bill Eddy, and he wrote the book on BIF. And what it stands for is brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So make your request brief, no opinions, emotions, defenses, or even scolding. Keep it friendly. You don't have to be overly friendly, like, oh, I really liked your outfit last week, but just keep it friendly, and then keep it firm. So rather than telling your co-parent, you need to do this and you need to respond by this time, that if you're on the receiving end of that, that's going to shut you down. You're not going to want a co-parent at that point. I do like to talk about social media and electronics. So social media can be bad for a co-parent relationship. Again, a lot of family and friends will post stuff, and what access to does your child have to any social media? Are you and your co-parent on the same social media site? Do you guys have mutual friends or family? And then are your children on those sites? So there was a kiddo who stepmom was on, I think it was Facebook, and she was just going to town about mom. And guess who was friends with stepmom? It was the kiddo. And so just be super mindful of that aspect. Let's see, a note on whether or not your social media settings are public or private. Folks, in this day and age, I wouldn't expect that anything is private that goes online, because once it's on there, it's on there. And even if it's set to private, your child can still just Google your name, and you'll come up, and it may have some of that on there, it may not. Kind of talked about this. The one point is, do you really think your children don't know how to unlock your phone? I mean, kiddos these days are 1 year old, and they have a little tablet or a phone. Even if it's a pretend one, they have it. So they are smart, they are savvy, and I guarantee, unless any of you are in IT, I guarantee you they know more about your phone than we do. So here's another thing to think about. So in your phone, what do you have your co-parent's name saved as in your phone? I did a child interview, and the girl, so we were talking about that, and she said that dad's phone had mom. The name was saved as the devil, and then a background thing would ring up whenever she would call, and it was of a devil. I think dad more thought that it was funny, but to the child, again, they don't know how to process that. It's not necessarily funny because they don't understand, again, depending on the age of the child. What's the ringtone that you have set for when your co-parent calls? So those are things to think about when you're wanting to reduce conflict with your co-parent. The importance of a parenting plan. So whether or not you have been to court or you're planning to go to court, you really put some thought into the parenting plan that you would like to see happen, because a good parenting plan can help reduce conflict. For example, holidays. If you don't have holidays in your parenting plan, they're already stressful times anyway, and a lot of times we'll see a not very good parenting plan, we'll see it fall apart just because of holidays. So it's important to have a parenting plan that fits the needs of your children and of your family. So when designing a plan, for one, you want to think about how does it adjust for changes. So for example, the age of the child is, how are you guys going to handle the next year in school when maybe now they're in high school versus junior high? How is it going to change for new relationships? Those aren't necessarily things that you would put in your plan. Those are more things to think about. Think about also how far is your home from your co-parent's home? Because, for example, if you have a parent who has parenting time, a lot of times we'll see like every other week, Wednesdays after school until 7 p.m. Well, if you live 30 miles away from your child's school, you pick them up, you're going to be driving 30 miles home, driving 30 miles back to meet the co-parent. And what kind of quality time are you really even getting on that Wednesday visit? Who's going to be doing the transporting? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be your significant other? Work those things out on the onset before waiting until it's conflict. You also want to talk or think about your schedules, your work schedule. What's your personal schedule like? What are your children's schedules? These are things you're going to want to ask yourself when you're putting together a parenting plan. And does your child have any special needs, or spend time with friends and extended family? Important in designing a parenting plan and putting it all together, one of the most important things is to have days and times outlined in your plan. I go back to that example of new significant other and how now, because we see a lot of people that say, oh, we get along really great. We don't need to put the days and times in the plan. We're great. We're reasonable. We're flexible. And then 3 months later, it falls apart because it might not be because of new significant other. It could be for whatever reason. But now you're in a position where there's nothing in place that says who and where the child will be at any given time. If you ever need law enforcement to help you enforce your parenting plan, if it doesn't have specific days and times in there, the chances that they're going to help you is very slim. The chances that law enforcement is going to help anyway, it really depends on the situation. They kind of try to stay out of child custody cases and those matters. So just that as a heads up, don't think that you can call law enforcement and they're going to fix it all for you, because a lot of times they can't and they don't. They say you need to go back to court. Vacation time. This could even be a staycation. It's not like you have to go somewhere, but what it is uninterrupted time that you have and your co-parent will have where you have the kiddos all with you for, I say uninterrupted, it means like no exchanges are going back and forth. That doesn't mean that there can't be phone call, email, text here and there. And then consider a tiebreaker each year. So for example, you've got plans to take the kids to Disneyland this year, and that time is June 1 to June 10. And your co-parent comes back and says, no way, I was taking the kids to Lagoon from June 1 to June 10, or we were going to visit family in New York, or whatever it is. And so the way that you can set that up as a tiebreaker is that you can just say, whichever parent has the child on an even year, they get precedence over that time. So it also doesn't, by putting in vacation time, it's the same for the parent. The other parent will still get their vacation time. It's just they don't get it from that June 1 to June 10. Parenting plans, really should be in writing. Any of this stuff should be in writing, even if you're getting along great now. And the thing of it is I don't want you to think too that if you guys are getting along well with your co-parent, that doesn't, I don't want you to feel like I'm picking on you, because this is kind of just stuff to think about through the lens of keeping conflict low. But maybe you don't have conflict, and maybe you never have, and maybe you never will, and that's great too. Just keeping each other aware of activities, schooling, doctor appointments. Again, that's where a co-parenting app can really be very helpful. Talk about the holiday schedule and special days that you have to celebrate. What days do you celebrate? Is there a perfect, or not perfect, a specific, someone's birthday? Maybe in dad's home, you guys have done grandpa's birthday for the last 10 years. Maybe that's something. So think about how you want. Think about, what do you want? What holidays do I want? What does this look like? And start there, and then see what your co-parent wants to do. You could even have where one parent, sorry, we just had our office dog walk in and I got distracted. But, one parent, let's say, maybe celebrates Christmas, but maybe the other parent doesn't celebrate Christmas. So thinking these things through. You can also split the holidays. So maybe you both celebrate Christmas. How do you want to split that up? Is it they're with mom until 10 p.m. Christmas Eve, or they're with mom, overnight until noon on Christmas Day? Think through that stuff. Birthdays, your birthday, your children's birthday. Think about your co-parents' birthday as well. So finally, one thing to keep in mind is that if you and your co-parent come up with an agreement and what you want for the parenting plan together, you both are going to be more likely to follow that plan And whereas if it was, say, a custody evaluator or the judge who makes a decision regarding the parenting time, it might be something that you completely don't even like. Maybe it's sole custody to your co-parent. So if you can hash this stuff out before, you're just that much farther ahead of the game. And children are likely to accept outcome if they have feel heard, but I assure you they do not want to make the decision, even if they say they do. Keeping your kiddos healthy during the stress of a separation. There are protective factors that you can do that protect their long-term emotional, behavioral, mental health. These protective factors are love. So children measure how much a parent loves them, and they need to hear that. They also really need that reassurance that it's not your fault. We're not divorcing because of you. This is just something that dad and I are going to have to work through. They need predictability. So, that they need to know that, okay, on Sunday, I'm going to do mom's house. On Wednesdays, I'm going to do this. They need, again, that predictability. Same thing with continuity. And even if they are children, we can all still respect their feelings, even if they disagree, because that's just teaching them how to disagree with a positive outcome, and how to communicate appropriately. And then permission to love both parents. So we don't want the child choosing. We don't want them to choose between one parent and the other. It's okay for them to love that parent. Even if the parent was not safe, say an incident happened, whether it was domestic violence or, child abuse or whatever it is, it doesn't mean that they should stop loving the parents. And it's okay to say that was really scary and that should not have happened. But we still love your mom or dad. So the good news is that children are resilient, and resilient means they bounce back well. And so, and I say this because let's say that you've just sat through this and you're thinking, oh my gosh, we're doing all the things that she said not to do. That doesn't mean that your kiddo is going to be completely damaged, for lack of better words. They're resilient. It is never too late to start co-parenting and co-parenting well. A couple of just some important resources. So if you are going to file a case, whether it's a divorce or a custody case, and you don't have an attorney or you don't want to use an attorney, really reach out to the court assistance office. There's one in Kenyon County and there's one in Ada County. And they will, for one, they have the paperwork that you need to file. So they're going to have all of those documents there, and they'll have step-by-step instructions on how to fill that stuff out. In Kenyon County, they do a workshop that they basically kind of go line by line of how to fill out your paperwork. So reach out to them. It's a wonderful workshop. We get great feedback on it. And then family court services, again, there's one in Ada County and there's one in Kenyon County. They're an excellent resource, especially when it comes to parenting plans and development and behavioral health. They're a great resource for that. And then this is just a resource for us, for my office. We work solely in where there is co-parent, I don't want to say co-parent conflict, but where there's co-parents is our focus. And we do a number of different services that are ordered by the judge. And then kids services, I mentioned the nonprofit agency when we first started. If there are safety concerns that you have with your co-parent, rather than supervising it yourself or having a friend supervise it, I would look into having it professionally supervised. There's also exchanges. So what we do is we'll have dad drop the kiddo off at this time, and then mom picks them up 5 minutes later, or vice versa. And so, maybe that's where the conflict is that exchanges. This is a way to make that decrease. Another way, actually, if you don't do supervised, but is to exchange, like say, for example, at school or daycare. So dad drops kiddos off Monday morning at school, and then mom picks them up Monday afternoon. You guys don't ever have to, well, I don't want to say ever have to see each other, but you're not crossing paths that often. And let's see, I left barely a few minutes to answer questions, but I'm happy to answer questions, any that you have.
I have one, and I'm sorry if you said it.
That's okay.
Instead of doing exchanges at police station, because that's where we're going right now, which was recommended by